Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Neal Sofian. He is the CEO of Tuzag. That's a behavioral optimization company that's also working on conversational artificial intelligence or conversational AI. Neal, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
So let's start off with a little bit of your background. I think for the listeners, it's always helpful to understand the perspective of where you came from, how you arrived at this current intersection with behavioral health and healthcare. Tell us a little bit about what you've done in your past and some of the highlights in there.
Great. So I'm a public health guy by training. Really, after graduate school, besides running a street drug crisis center for 4.5 years, I was invited to come out to Group Health Cooperative in Puget Sound in Seattle to look at a new concept called worksite health promotion, which you go yawn today, but in 1982 was kind of an interesting Kellogg Foundation founded grant to really explore that. And in the course of doing that, we started looking at what type of approaches would work to make changes in populations. And as a sideline of that, we got involved in a National Cancer Institute randomized clinical trial around looking at the concept of using phone coaches for smoking cessation, which again, in 1986 was the hot new technology, was the idea of you calling somebody instead of actually having to be in a room with them. And we did a randomized trial and discovered that indeed telephonic smoking cessation could be very successful. And based upon that randomized trial, we started a company called Free and Clear. And it is now the largest smoking cessation program in the United States. It's owned by Optum. It's now called Quit for Life. And I'm delighted to know over 4 million people have gone through the program as a result of what we started 30 years ago. That was followed by getting very involved in looking at how can you get perspective in terms of behavior change. And we looked at the work of people like Dee Eddington and looking at perspective modeling around health behavior, and was involved in a startup that looked at how do you integrate phone coaching, perspective modeling, and tailored communications in that process, which was working with some folks from the University of North Carolina and also a gentleman named Dr. Matt Kruder, who is now the head of School of Public Health at Washington U. And we saw, could we combine those pieces? It was run by Monsanto, and let us say it was a short-lived venture. They really understood pharmaceuticals. I don't think they really understood the notion of population health. But as a result of that, we spun out a separate company called the Newsoft Group, which really did focus on the whole notion of could you create microcultures of meaning? In essence, could you help communicate using technology where people would learn through the experience of other people they identified with? Which sounds a heck of a lot like, oh, Facebook. And so we ended up building what was called the Cancer Survivors Network for the American Cancer Society, and it essentially was Facebook for cancer. The major difference being that it was 1999, and I don't think Mr. Zuckerberg had had his bar mitzvah yet. So it was a pretty interesting concept. I don't know if it's still there, to be honest, but we spent multiple years building out what was a fascinating ability to connect people, have them share their stories, have them share their resources based upon contextual relevance of, I'm a woman, I have breast cancer, I'm in remission, I'm 35 to 40, I'm looking for new treatments based upon the fact that I'm in recurrence, but I still want to have children. Or what is sex like after treatment? And be able to not only combine the stories, but actually turn them into talk radio shows that you could listen to over the web. So it was pretty fascinating stuff. And what we realized out of that was that there's a separate and equally important approach to this kind of microculture of meaning, which is either you can connect people together, and out of that, they create relevant content, contextually relevant content, or you could get to know people and then on the fly be able to get to know that person, build a profile on them, and on the fly build contextually relevant content. And folks like Dave Bolger, who is the founder of Tuzag, and other people like Vic Strecker and Matt Kruder were doing that kind of work, and really showing that you could highly tailor and contextualize content on the fly, almost like creating Mad Libs on absolute steroids. And so in both cases, what you're doing is making information become contextually relevant to me. So you're creating what I would call a microculture of meaning. When I was left Premier Blue Cross, where I was the director of member engagement for 7 years, I reconnected with Dave, who'd been working on this, and we said, how can we apply this across the full spectrum of health behavior? So that's what we're doing now.
So as you think back on that, I mean, that's an extensive career with, some pretty large inflection points. I mean, I think that there's probably not a physician on this planet that wouldn't envy the number of people that you've potentially positively impacted. Yep. From a smoking cessation. Just pick that one example of people that you have turned from smoking to non-smoking. And I know, that was one of the most, if not the most successful program. When you think back on that career, as you look back, what were the small things that occurred to you that directed you to this concept? So as an example, phone-based communication, which was revolutionary at the time. How did you arrive at that? What was the process?
I wish I could tell you that it was my brilliant idea, but it wasn't. Dr. Tracy Orleans was the PI on the original research. And I think the thing I bring to the table was not so much saying, oh my God, let's do the phone. Even though I actually had been running a phone crisis center for 4 years before that. So I was perfectly comfortable with the phone, and my wife was actually the original phone coach for the research. But I think what I looked at it was saying, oh my God, this stuff works, let's commercialize it. Most people in the research field in those days would say, oh, this works, let's publish so we can get another grant. And I was looking at how do you take this, because my goal was always a public health goal, which is how do you change prevalence? And that became the inflection for that, was like, oh my God, this now gives us reach. I think that the concept of reach was what was so important, and using technology for reach. And so if that's the case, then the goal should be, how do I get millions of people to do this?
So I listened to that, and the thing that I picked out, aside from the realization that commercialization, and specifically asking the question, how do you change behavior? I think for me, and I've heard this from others, and I guess it's one of the threads that I pull out from these conversations, was it's the adjacent possible. So because you were doing that telephony based, and it was working in that small environment, you saw the potential and were able to transition into a new environment. Is that a reasonable?
Yeah, and I think, I look at innovators. There are inventors in the world who really come up with revolutionary, no one's ever thought of that one before. And there's a few of those people around. And then there's innovators who are smart enough to hang out around inventors and say, I can take that and make it work. Steve Jobs didn't invent much of anything. But he was brilliant at understanding the possibility. I think that if there was something early in my career, was really more about being open to the possibility of seeing what other brilliant people were doing. I would say the same would be true of working with Dave Bolger today, in terms of his understanding of storytelling, behavior change, and tailoring technology, or the work of a Vic Strecker and understanding, or Alex Drain and looking at purpose and the underlying behaviors that belie our public behaviors. So it's really, I think, the greatest piece of the innovation for me is just openness. I would also say the other part is storytelling. I think there's something about narration. People are not automatons. We're not information robots. We are all about understanding our stories, our myths, the Joseph Campbell sort of thing, the hero myth or whatever it be. And we were all on journeys. And if we can take technology and help those stories be transmitted to ever more people and shared, and I think that's a constant thing, whether it was with the smoking or whether it became with what we did with cancer, or now what we're doing around we did with end-of-life care and support, or now what we're doing around almost anything that connects people together or makes things relevant. It's taking information and translating it into a story that resonates, and then using that and a deep understanding of behavioral economics to then nudge people to do stuff with it. Use the story to make that actionable.
So is maybe the story part of the sort of foundation of familiarity? Is that the way that we earn or gain that familiarity to allow us to then connect the dots possibly?
Well, familiarity, so it's one thing. Let's say I was going to start a smoking cessation session with you. A likely thing, the first thing many people would do is have said in the old days was, so did you ever smoke? That would be the first question. I can honestly tell you I was a 3-pack a day smoker. I can tell you stories about the fact that I was a smoker because it seemed to help me get connected to some women who I wanted to date. That I once sat in a restaurant and accidentally caught my coat on fire. That was very impressive to that date. And you can hear other people who are smokers go, yeah, that guy's been there. Or that the way I quit smoking, there was no free and clear when I quit smoking. So I went to the ledge of the Grand Canyon with another girlfriend, and we had one last cigarette and went and stayed in the bottom of the Grand Canyon for 8 days. The next person down the line hears that story and goes, yep, he's part of my tribe. He gets it. And I would not, and in that case, I'd also say I enjoyed the habit. I wasn't there to hector or lecture. I was there to say, it's like walk a mile in my shoes. And story provides that for you.
So, I think that sort of connection and tribe aspect sort of plays into much of what's, come subsequently in some of the things that you're doing. I know at this point you're moving to an even more sort of agile, focused kind of activity that is trying to influence behavior, very much in line with my sort of principle of incremental steps, the nudges. Tell us a little bit about that.
When you go on a date, not that I haven't gone on a date in God since Ronald Reagan was president, but my wife is, I think, happy about that. But when you go on a date, what you do is you share your stories with each other. You first start by saying, so tell me about yourself. At least if you want to have a successful date, you don't start by just talking. You listen, you ask, you inquire, you find out what are they about, what do they care about, what do they think is fun, what's meaningful to them. You get a little history, you get a little color. And so if you're doing that and you're building story, imagine now you can use technology to literally make that a conversation. And it can be digital. It doesn't have to be just with a live coach like I would do in the past, but you could actually create a third party, whether it's through chat or voice, or eventually actually through your television, and it could even be tailored video. You'll be able to have conversations with an entity, a bot, so to speak. We call our bot Jamie because Jamie is gender fluid, but Jamie can actually get to know you, and then we'll remember the conversations. And based upon that, understand what is your story. And based upon understanding your story, knows how to go about nudging you in terms of behaviors, but also not just what is important to nudge you towards, but knows how to talk to you. What are the metaphors that are meaningful to you? What are the things you value? The way you nudge people to a behavior change is not to tell them because it's good for them. Most people pretty aware smoking is not good for you, but they're getting something out of it. And if that's the case, you need to understand that. And if you're going to change them, you have to show them another way of getting something out of it for themselves. So if it was about chasing women, show me that I can be successful without smoking, whatever that be. Though the woman I ended up marrying was a smoking cessation instructor. So in my case, I married a maintenance program. So, whatever works. But it creates that kind of intimacy that information alone never has. And the technology of whether it be the Amazon device, I don't want to use her name because she's sitting next to me. Notice I've given her I've animated her by calling her she, or a Google Home or Google Show, where you'll be able to actually have these conversations And then actually out of that conversation, think about an Amazon show where you'll be able to say, hey, and we've concluded you actually need a doctor. Up on the screen pops 3 doctors that she happens to know are in your network. And she says, click on one and you can make an appointment. I mean, all of a sudden the conversation leads to action, and then she remembers. And so the next time she sees you, she can say, how'd your appointment go? Oh, that's now you actually, it implies caring. I mean, now granted, it's algorithmic and then it's machine learning, but it creates relationship, and relationship is built on stories. So it's just a very different way of doing it, and it allows us to touch millions of people, and then also connect them to real people when you need them. I am not a huge believer that technology just solves all problems. It doesn't, but it really can connect us to stuff.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Neal Sofian. He is the CEO of Tuzag, a behavioral optimization company that is building conversational AI. We were just talking about those connections and some of the sort of essentially the foundation that you build up by learning about those individuals. Let's just follow up a little bit, because I know some of the things that I hear from people around this is, well, it's technology, it's not human. You know, how is that really delivering value? We want human contact. What's been your experience around that?
I started by asking my mother, who passed away last year at 94, what technology she would use. And more importantly, watched. Don't ask them, watch them. You know, so she was an avid user of Facebook. And in her 90s. Why? Not because she loved the computer. She liked to play solitaire, and then she loved to see pictures of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was all about family for her. And so she was very sharp on technology when it was meaningful to her. And then I asked her, how would you feel about the fact if there was a little Amazon dot sitting on your dining room table, and it was tied to a smart pill bottle and some sensors and things like that. And every morning she'd wheel out, she was on a walker, and it would go, hey, good morning, Bubbles. That was her name. How you doing, sweetie? And would just say, you know, and would know whether or not she'd taken her pills or not, because smart pill bottle, right? But instead of just simply acknowledging that, she'd say, hey, I see you haven't taken your pills. How come? Well, they make me feel bad. Oh, what's going on? It makes me nauseous. Oh, that's really not good. Here's some things that might help. And if that happened 2 days in a row, the response might be, can I connect you up with your caregiver or your doctor? Click, and let me send a text to your doctor right now to give you a call. And her response was, yeah. And oh, by the way, honey, Rachel Maddow is coming on in half an hour. Oh, because my mother loved MSNBC. So in that case, it's connecting her up around the things that are important to her within the context of her life. She could also say, hey, are you having a problem? Can I let your son know? I'll send him a text and let him know that there's something he can do. All that is mimicking the nuanced aspects of communication as opposed to the facts and transactional aspects of communication. And she was going, sure. I mean, in fact, there's a lot of research out there that shows how quickly kids and seniors both will attach to robots. And in essence, these kind of devices, and attribute humanity and personality to them. We're social beings. We have a need to connect. Like I said, I don't think this should ever be viewed as a complete alternative to human contact. It's not. At the same time, we're reaching a point with a senior population, for example, where there's simply not going to be enough healthcare providers to provide all the services that seniors are going to need if you just look at the demographics. And even though I would love to say everybody should be in touch physically and you know give your mom a call, this kind of thing at distance can be hugely helpful and also help connect you up to people when you absolutely do need them. And I think that's really helpful. For example, in my case, my mom was in St. Louis, I was in Seattle, and my brother lived in Jerusalem. I mean, so I was actually the close by child, you know, only 2 time zones away. So goodness, yes, there's huge opportunity around that, both for caregivers and for the patients themselves.
I think there's another thing that I've discovered as part of this, and I've got mirrored experiences. And my mother was also the sort of she featured in many of my presentations, although she didn't actually know it, and I don't know how she would actually feel about it. I'm sure she'd be fine, but it is the fact that people are more honest with technology.
Correct.
With difficult subjects, it turns out, even though they know there's some human consequences, so declaring or having discussions about things that potentially they wouldn't have with the person or would be uncomfortable, knowing that person, the physician in this case perhaps, gets that data and then comes and talks to them, is a better experience than having that conversation first off. It's just a strange sort of experience through all of this, and we get additional value with our interaction, and the fastest adoption metrics are all in the elderly because they see the value of this.
Correct. And I would tell you, you're absolutely spot on. And either whether it's technology or there's a reason why people talk to bartenders. There's why people sometimes have conversations on airplanes with people they will never see again that are surprisingly intimate, or people who have that role. So Vic Strecker used to always say, if you gave me a choice between 100 nurses or 100 hairstylists to do behavior change, give me the 100 hairstylists, because they know how to listen and go and make the connection. They understand appreciative inquiry. In essence, we're talking about very similar sorts of things. And it can be hugely powerful to share that, especially if you can build technology that then remembers. So I think that's important, so that as every conversation builds in a profile, so that we're not just starting like it's a brand new conversation every day. It's like, how are you doing? I know you haven't slept good for multiple days. That elicits a different response than one bad night, or whatever that be. So the technology can be very intimate. And like I said, it also can know when to connect you back up to people. It's not trying to be the total replacement. It's trying to be a way to be more connected. And having said that, it's both really exciting, and I can see where some people are going like, man, that sounds creepy. So I think all of that needs to add in the concept of privacy, and you have control over your own data. You only, Jamie only gets to talk to you about things you want to talk about. You don't get to share any data. She doesn't get to share any data that you don't want shared. And so, like any good confidential relationship, it respects the party you're involved with.
Fantastic. So unfortunately, as is often the case, we're just about out of time. Any parting thoughts on where this is going and what the opportunities are before we close?
I would tell you that the opportunities are unlimited. We need to think about, how do you change prevalence in a population, not just, is this an effective behavior change? It's like the goal is to change millions of people, and the secret is you have to do it one person at a time based upon what's meaningful to them. And for the first time, I would say our imagination is actually the delimiter, not the technology.
Fantastic. Once again, just a delight to spend a little bit of time, Neal. I think truly insightful concepts around this personalized agents. The expansion of the sort of concepts that you built on in terms of behavioral science. And obviously, speaking my language, I know not everybody buys into this incremental steps. I always believe that, that's ultimately on all of our pathways. So a real pleasure. So thanks for joining me today. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been my pleasure. This is fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at HealthcareNOWradio.com, and tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.